I'm Daniel Hahn. I just retired after 34 years in law enforcement, the last 11 as police chief, including the police chief in Sacramento. And today we have with us Flossie Crump and Felicia Allen, first two women to ever serve as patrol officers in the entire Sacramento region and accomplished many things in the department amongst blazing trails for others. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I grew up in a little town called Tucumcari in New Mexico. I remember some issues that I had with school, but I was first kind of introduced to the idea that being African American or Black was different. Each year in April, around my birthday at school, we'd have these tests. And I would study hard to take this test. And I remember each year after taking the test, when we get the results, I would be called in and told that, oh, you're really good, you're great, you're really good with your hands, chopping cotton, sorting cotton, and picking fruit. And I would run home or go home to my mom, and my mom would tell me, my mom was just absolutely awesome. She would tell me, no, honey, you just keep studying. Next year, you're going to do better. Next year, you're going to do better. You need to study harder. You need to study harder. And I really didn't understand what was going on at the time. Like the N-word was used quite often, but my mom taught us, or I remember her teaching us that though it's a bad word, it's not you. So I grew up knowing that I wasn't.
The neighborhood I grew up in was predominantly all Black. We just a bunch of little kids having a lot of fun. I'd never really been around white people at all. When I got to California, I was about 13. And that was the first time I had really been around any other ethnic group than Black kids. My first encounter with racism, I was going down the street with my mom down Don Julio Boulevard, and a little girl was with her mother coming towards us, and she grabs her mother's coat tail and she says, "Mommy, is that one of them? Is that a nigger?" And she was very, just wanting to get information from her mom. And her mom pulled her and they kept walking. And I felt, I really felt less than. I felt bad. And my mom said, there are always going to be people like this. And she just kept walking and we kept walking. I never really had a good feeling about the police. I never wanted to be involved with them. Most of my friends did not.
Did you ever see any African American police officers?
No, not a single one.
But I remember seeing them come into my parents' home and had my father sitting in a chair. The crazy thing about it, they were wearing all white, and they beat the heck out of my father. My mother ended up pulling us, the kids, aside into another room. And years later, I understood what it was. So I also then understood my father's attitude toward law enforcement or anybody with authority. And at this time, it's quite obvious now that I'm talking about the KKK that actually came in and beat the heck out of my father right in front of us. And at the time, I didn't know what it was. That morning, we got up to go to my aunt's home. And as we started, I had forgotten something at home, so I ran back it was understood that I'd go back and get it and I'd catch up with them. So I did go back, whatever it was, I got it. And as I'm trying to catch up with them, I could see them quite a distance ahead of me. But as I was trying to catch up with them, I was literally kidnapped off the street, thrown into a vehicle, driven miles out in the country. The crazy thing about it is I can remember struggling and fighting and trying to get out of this car that didn't have the handle on the passenger side. And I remember driving past my sisters. As I'm trying to raise my head up and get out of the car, I remember passing them. And I remember biting the guy on the leg as hard as I could, the handle on his door, snaking under and running. And then it was almost like a nightmare. I kept waiting to wake up from this nightmare because I'm running through something that was as tall as, or almost as tall as I was. My first instinct was run to the house. I thought, no, it could be his. So I went back into this field or whatever it was and waited for hours. Eventually, it's like, I need to get home. It's getting dark. I need to get home. Knocked on the door. And I remember to this day feeling what victims now describe as, and I'm not a victim per se, but I remember thinking I felt filthy, dirty, because he had tried to touch me. And when the lady opened the door, I remember telling her the lie, the protective lie. My mom dropped me off down the street to babysit. She left before she realized they weren't home. Would you take me home? My mom goes out and paid her, comes back in, and that's when I tell my mom what had happened to me. And I'm now panicking the whole bit. All the emotions are going on. And I remember, I didn't understand it at the time, but my mom says, we're not going to call the police. We're not going to do anything. And my mom's thing was, honey, we can't call the police. We're not going to call the police because no police officer or no one's going to believe that a white man kidnapped a young black girl and tried to do to that young black girl what this guy tried. We're not going to call the police because I don't want you hurt all over again. Several weeks later, I remember, this was a small town, and I remember, everything goes on the news. So on the news, we're watching TV. All of us are sitting around, we're watching TV, and they're announcing that this guy had kidnapped, raped, and beat this young child. And I think the child was no more than 7, 8, 9. I can't remember the exact age now. I looked at my mom, and my mom looked at me, and we knew it was the same person. And then I started saying to myself, something needs to change. My whole goal was to become a detective or an officer to keep other parents from having to do what my mom did. I think that when Felicia and I came on, one of the driving forces were you have to have brute strength. And I still think that we're, as women as a whole, I think we're still kind of battling that. Our hair had to be cut the same length as men, and you had this, not below the collar. You couldn't cut. So we had to cut our hair. Our hair was, and then they had the hat, because we had to have them redone. The pockets on the pants, we had to have everything adjusted. So if you look closely, you could realize that we were wearing an altered uniform, simply because it just did not, there was no such thing. So, and then, of course, our locker room. The locker room, there was no, it was not a locker room.
Well, there wasn't a locker room for us.
Just lockers put together in a square. And then when I say lockers, there was no wall. So you could actually hear everything that goes on either side. And the things that were being said were atrocious. I mean, they felt comfortable to say what they felt. And I think a lot of it was said to get our attention. Some of the racial and the sexist and some of the just downright gross things that were said was designed to offend us and I think to get us to quit.
And I think the idea what the department was, just like Flossie said, was divide and conquer. They were definitely sure that if they split us up, that both of us would fail.
So I would go over to work out and I'd sign in. But I started noticing that things were written next to my name, like a blackbird with one stone, or nigger. So those kind of things were written next to my name. It was interesting because I also saw the chief of police name on that log with that stuff written. To me, the public initially was more accepting than our officers were.
Yeah.
Whereas the officers, not all of them, but and the administration to a large part was said, we don't want females here.
Yeah.
So the roadblocks were put up.
I felt that the community not only needed me, but they accepted me and they wanted me to be there.
I just always love how you both always talk about the officers that helped, not just the officers or the department that did detrimental things, because it shows people have a choice.
My first 3 training officers were white. They took heat from administration for helping us, for encouraging us, for supporting us. And I think on one hand, they knew what we were up against, but then by the same token, they were also taking the heat as well.
The atrium, which is the largest room at police headquarters in Sacramento, is now the Crump Allen Atrium, named after both of you. So what does that mean to you to have this physical large room named after you?
Gives me a sense of pride. I really am proud to be, I was always proud to be a Sacramento police officer, but to know that I am part of history that will be long-standing. When people go into that atrium, they'll say, "Oh, who are these women?" And and they'll know our story. It really does. It makes me feel proud.
It's a public way, and I'm going to say a personal way from you to say thank you. That says a lot. I mean, and it says thank you for all of that. And when I say all of that, I think about the 25 plus years. Until you actually introduced the atrium, did I realize
That it was
what it meant to having gone through all of that. Because I often say, when I look back on my career, there's a lot of things that I would not have chosen to go through. But I'm glad that I went through them and made it through them, because all of that makes me who I am today.
It has made a difference. It's made the department better. It's made the community better. It's made us better.
Oh, yeah.
And it's made the people that we worked around better.
I've never been with either one of you where you haven't expressed how much you love the Sacramento Police Department.
Oh, yeah.
And I know for myself, I find that unusual, being all the things that you've gone through in that department, and yet you still love that department. Why?
Well, you can't paint a whole family with the same brush, and they are a family. You can't use a negative and paint everybody, and that's how I see it. I realized that they were individuals, and I respect that the fact that as an individual you have a right to your opinion. It's how you express that opinion that makes the difference, and I've had both. So my thing is that I say that the majority of the people on the police department are good people. They're my family. They're somebody that I would protect. And when I say the police department, that encompasses the police department until I run into you otherwise. So my thing is, with all the negative, you can't paint everyone with that same brush. And I refuse to do that. Because again, that department made me who I am today.
21 years old when I came onto the police department. I was the youngest, absolute youngest. I grew up there. I was raised there. I feel like some of the best men and women in my life I met there at that department, and I still consider them family. And not just the officers, the dispatchers, the clerks, the janitors. We were one big family, and I still feel like that. I mean, it makes me it makes me sentimental when I think about it, because those guys have been there through the good and bad in my whole life.
Change organizations for the better, right?
Yes.
You know, and you guys really have a lot to do with that, because it's never ever easy being the first. But when you guys came on, there really weren't any firsts. You know, you were the first and had to figure it out. But I can say women have unique challenges, and you both really, you know, worked very hard to overcome those and show other women like me that it could be done.
And I'm really proud to see that the legacy is going to continue.
It was a wonderful thing to say thank you for all the things that we went through, and that it was worth it.